Good morning. We have six speakers today for these sessions, and all of them are here. And we have roughly around 2 hours time. We will have presentation of around 15 minutes, and then 5 minutes to 6 minutes of discussion if there is any question, observations. I will keep my intervention to the minimum. Today in this academic session, we are discussing preserving heritage and rights, challenges and opportunities for the Indian diaspora. It is very important for Indian diaspora to maintain its identity to remain Indian diaspora. There are many communities who have lost the identity. They got merged completely, and therefore they cannot be part of any diasporic network. We know as diaspora in academics, we have various categories of diaspora. One of them is lost diaspora. 7 million people of Indian origin were in Myanmar. Now, even 3 million is a guess. Most of them were lost in Myanmar. There are quite a good number of them who got lost in Francophone territories as their Indian, as Indian descendant. So, and there are some which are what we call in academics dormant diaspora. Lost diaspora, dormant diaspora. Dormant diaspora, again, you see in Francophone and some of the remote places where they know who they are, but they have not maintained any cultural traits or traditions in a significant way to distinguish themselves from the other community. But they have a sense and feeling of belonging to a particular cultural ethnic groups. And these dormant diaspora, when get opportunities to reorganize their cultural, civilizational features, practices, belief, then they again join the mainstream of a diaspora. So even those who are maintaining all these things, if they don't maintain and they are not cautious to maintain their cultural identity, civilizational identity, their heritage, their values, they also might lose and slip to dormant diaspora and lost diaspora. And therefore, in today's session, we are discussing some of the experience by professional academics specialized into their countries, their subject. And I have pleasure to invite Mr. Dhuni Dharam Yasdev from Mauritius. Has someone got his CV? Maybe the speaker can introduce themselves a bit because I don't have the full CV with them, so that audience can relate with your background. Thank you so much. 15 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Professor Dube. Well, Mr. Salamai Pagi, that is good morning. And in our language, PIO language, Namaste or Pranam. By the way, I'm very much thankful to GOPIO Mauritius, GOPIO Malaysia, and GOPIO International for having given me this opportunity to come in front of you and to talk on a subject of my country, that is Mauritius, a case study for the successful heritage preservation initiatives in the Indian diaspora for this conference. By the way, I am Mr. Denny from Mauritius, which is known as a Chota Bharat, because 70% of the population are PIOs, or from Indian origin. I have been a rector of a college, and I had the opportunity of being the chairman of Aprawasi Ghat Trust Fund. It is a fund which preserves and propagate the Indian cultures, the PIOs. Apravasi Ghat is a place where the first Indian indentured laborers landed, which I'm going to give you in my note. Well, a brief history. The people of Indian origin have been in foreign countries centuries and centuries earlier than we think. Some left the motherland, that is India, willingly, whereas some were forced to do so. Mauritius is a very small island. It docked in the Indian Ocean. It is far from the Great Peninsula, and it received its PIOs first in the Dutch colony when the Dutch brought Indians to Mauritius. Later, the French colonists brought them from the south, that is Pondicherry side and Chennai side, and they came as slaves, as some came as house workers, and some came even as artisans. And finally, the British brought them from the northern part of the island, from Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Bengal, to work as indentured laborers. And you can see here, the indentured laborers came to the Apravasi Ghat. Our narrative begins on the 2nd November 1834, a date which is remarkable that the first Indian indentured laborers came to Mauritius, and they were the pioneers. It is they who made the great experiment of going to work abroad overseas. That's why I call it a moment in history which was very preoccupant. Those days, in 1834 to 1920, around 465,000 Indian immigrants came to Mauritius, and they were a trial because the British wanted to bring them to work for them to replace the slaves. Now, this journey became a great experiment because 5 million Indians crossed around the ocean to work for British and French colonies. This journey marked resilience and perseverance and the foundation for the rich and diverse Indian diaspora. And today, as you all know, friends, that we have nearly 30 million PIOs spread around the world in about 100 countries. And here you are in front of me. India is renowned for its incredible diversity, where multiple languages, religions, and cultures coexist harmoniously. Mauritius is a prime example for this cultural mosaic, where one can find temples, mosques, churches, and gurudwaras standing side by side. And even the festivals like Eid, Christmas, and Holi, all are celebrated with enthusiasm. This illustrates how the Indian diaspora has successfully preserved its cultural, traditional, and language heritage across generations. However, at this stage, I would allow you, allow me to bow my head to our four great fathers who, even passing through hard times, were able to pass the Indian customs, traditions across the generations. He is my great-grandfather who came in the year 1865 at the age of 14. They passed through very severe moments, but they transmitted their culture, the tradition, the language to us, to our generation. And that's what I would ask the youngsters of today to learn from us. Not to ask from us things, but to learn, because when we make an omelette, we have to break the egg. You can't have the omelette without breaking the eggs. Three main factors for this success story: how the Indian diaspora has been preserved, how the Indian diaspora has preserved the cultures, the traditions, and the religions, or number one, I would say education and language. That is the key to empower future generations. Parents have given their children the sanskar of the PIOs, of the Indian cultures, of the Indian traditions. Babies were brought up while their mothers were singing Indian lullabies, songs, and stories. They were fed up with Indian food, and they were dressed with Indian clothes. At very young ages, all children had to go to the Bait Cars. We call them the Bait Cars. That is, those days, it was a maternal school. In Mauritius, I'm talking. They had to learn the Hindi language and the Indian habits of living. They were even taught to chant verses which our ancestors were chanting thousands of years before. Same like, I don't know how many of you have been doing. Om Bhurvasva. The role to educate the children became a never-ending process, because Mauritius is one of the rare countries where education is fully free from pre-primary to tertiary level. The state, that is the government, with its, in the collaboration with its different cultural centers, like in Mauritius we have got speaking unions, trust funds, and lots of educational institutions like the Mahatma Gandhi Institute, Rabindranath Tagore Institute, the Indira Gandhi Center for Indian Culture, the Ramayana Center, and the Rajiv Gandhi Center for Scientific Research, among others. They are mandated to identify, safeguard, promote tangible and intangible heritage, which include oral traditions, material culture, performing arts, knowledge and practices, rituals and festivals. In precise, education has always been a cornerstone of the Indian culture, and diaspora has contributed to uphold this value in Mauritius. My dear friends and delegates, who would have ever thought that Mauritius, which is like a dot, which I told you earlier, in the Indian Ocean, with a population of only around 100.2 million, would house the World Hindi Secretariat. And it would have enlisted the Bhojpuri Geet Gawai. I think you know what is Bhojpuri, Geet Gawai. And inscribe it on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. The second factor is religion and spirituality. Religion and spirituality have always been a central point of the Indian identity. And till today, it's good to tell you that till today, we have lots of pujas which are done. Like, we have got the Di Puja, the Bahariya Puja, we have got the Har Barauri Sang, and the Band Pani prayers as well. We have got religious festivals. Most of the Indian religious festivals we have got in Mauritius, which are practiced by all the PIOs. And the main one is the Mahashivratri, which is organized at the national level, and like many other festivals. And Mahashivratri, we have thousands of pilgrims going to the Ganga Talao, and it is the most sacred Hindu site outside India, with two big statues, two tall statues, giant statues of 108 foot, which have been constructed by Indian architects with the help of the Indian High Commission. The third factor, the last factor, which I have taken into consideration is the cultural diplomacy, strengthening ties between the nations and the Indian global network. This is a powerful tool to strengthen the ties between India and the countries where its diaspora resides. In Mauritius, the government through the High Commission and the cultural centers have actually promoted Indian culture, arts, and heritage across the island. Events such as the Indian Food Festival, the Indian Dress Exhibition, and the Indian Mela have taken large dimension in the preservation of Indian culture. And it has strengthened the bonds to ensure that future generations remain connected to their heritage. The International Day of Yoga, celebrated in over 190 countries, nowadays has been a practice since many years in Mauritius. Yoga has helped to spread the message of peace, health, and wellness, which are intrinsic to the Indian culture, among other values. The collaboration between the Indian diaspora and the Indian government in organizing cultural events, festivals, and academic exchanges has further strengthened our bonds. Such initiatives did not only enhance a global image, but it has a good cultural heritage with the world as well. Okay. So I would ask the younger generation, the yuvas, to take, that is, they must engage with their heritage, learn their language, and participate in cultural and religious activities as a pleasure or a gain, and not as an obligation, so that they will only honor their ancestors and the rich tapestry of Indian culture. So, at the end, my main aim is that for the generation to come, for our youngsters, we have to show them how we are going to, how they have to follow their ancestors, follow us in the meeting, and they have to go on the road that has been given. Thank you.
So you had earlier Portuguese, also Korean, Japanese, several other communities tried as indentured worker. They failed. The Chinese, the Java, from Java, Sumatra, Indians only succeeded. And they succeeded because for them, agriculture was a prime profession. And most of these indentured workers who came from Bihar and UP were only land-based agriculture workers. And therefore they succeeded like anything. And the number was high, and therefore you could see that they preserved those culture. Thank you, Mr. Dhani. It's not, that's what we discussed initially, that having the Indian culture is one thing, preserving is equally important. And that's how this Mauritius attempt to preserve several Indian cultural features through institutions, by registering them with UNESCO and practicing them day and night, flaunting them on television. You have Bhojpuri television channels and networks. I mean, it's not there in India also, in many places. So this is what Mauritius has done, and if you need to preserve Indian culture, take Indian cultural values at their right, Mauritius is one success story. We must applaud that and give a big hand to the Mauritius for all that they have done. Now we have the second speaker, Dr. Amit Singh. He is Associate Professor at the Special Center for National Security Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. He did his PhD on Malaysia and people of Indian origin. and he is going to talk to us on Indian diaspora in Malaysia, role of policy in supporting diaspora heritage preservation.
Very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizer, the GOPIO International, and in India, ODI, for giving me opportunity to share my views on this particular GOPIO convention. I was also part of the GOPIO convention the previous time, and today I am going to present my views on Indian diaspora in Malaysia, the role of policy in supporting diaspora heritage and preservation. I would like to thank Professor Dhaniram for setting the tone of this particular session of cultural heritage and its preservation, and Professor Dubey is very right, because the way Mauritius is preserving the cultural heritage, I think most of the other countries who are having the significant population of Indian diaspora, they should learn a lesson from a country like Mauritius. And I'm here to present my views on Malaysia. So if you compare Malaysia with Mauritius, no doubt there is no comparison at all, because my PhD was on Malaysia, and I visited during my PhD work in 2008. So during my interaction with the various set of people here during the PhD research work, then I asked simple question to some of the people, and specifically the younger generation and the older generation. So if I ask you, are you identify yourself first as Indians or Malaysian? So I have received a contrast answer. The future of Indian diaspora of Malaysia means the younger generation, they have mentioned they identify themselves as Malaysian, not Indians. On the other, the older generation, they have mentioned ki yes, we are Indian. We brought here by the various circumstances or the other. And the same question if you ask to the Mauritian people, because I visited over there, they are proudly flaunting their identity most of the time, including their linguistic identity. But here in Malaysia, the things are different due to the various reasons, because in Mauritius, the maximum population of that particular country belongs to India only. They are the majority. And here, Indians are the 7% of the total country's population, and they are contributing around 2% of this country's GDP, and almost 23% Chinese origin people are also here, and they are dominating the Malaysian economy. On the other, the government of Malaysia, on the behest of Bhumiputra policy, they are supporting Malays like anything. So Malays are politically very, very dominant here in this country, and Indian diaspora or people of Indian origin is somewhat sandwiched between economically dominated Chinese and politically dominated Malays. So they sandwich between these two significant population of Malaysia. On the other, despite some of these hardship, the generations of Malaysia, they try to preserve the identity as Indian or Indian culture. And that is why the organization of GOPIO like organization are contributing significantly in rejuvenating some of the Indianness among the younger people. Because diaspora heritage means, because most of the people, we very proudly underline ki the people of Indian origin or the NRIs or PIOs are the cultural ambassador of India. And they are spreading the Indian culture like anything all across the globe. And that is why the present Prime Minister Narendra Modi, whenever he is visiting any of the country which is having significant diaspora, these diaspora communities received well. Almost in most of the countries, Modi is getting some rock star kind of treatment by the diaspora community, and always be the present foreign minister of India or prime minister, always these people are having some or the other meeting with the diaspora community. The issue is that how we are going to preserve and why all these things are necessary or obligatory for the future generation, because to conserve and develop cultural resources, we have to remain part of the cultural heritage. And with long-term value, and because of the long-term value we have to put, and for the general public and for the future generation, diaspora heritage or preserving these cultural sites are very important. Here in Malaysia, because historically, not only Malaysia, the entire Southeast Asian countries were dominated by the Hindu kings of southern India. And because of this particular religious and cultural proximity, and geographical proximity, without coercing anything, we have spread our Hinduness, Sanskritization or Indian culture to the most of the Southeast Asian nation. And that is why the cultural imprints are still visible in today's day-to-day lifestyle of most of the Southeast Asian countries, including Malaysia. Because Hindu Raja Parmeshwaram of Malacca, he converted to Islam, and that is why the other people also followed the same. On the other, if we compare Malaysia with Indonesia, so Indonesia is proudly conserving the Hindu culture in their own nation. Their former president and the current president of Indonesia, they proudly mention, we have changed our religion but not our culture. And that is why, despite the largest Muslim nation of this world, they are still preserving Hinduness and Hindu culture. The Ramayanas and Mahabharata shadow play, they are proudly depicting. There are various Ramayana sites and various Hindu temples. They are preserving. Very old temples are still there. There is an island called Bali on which 80% of the Bali population is Hindus. And recently, the sister of Meghavati Sukarnoputri, the former president of Indonesia, she converted, she again adopted Hinduism. So some of these trends are also there because the Malay Peninsula, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the present day Singapore, they are part of the same culture still, because some dialects are different, but they speak the same language. So we have to learn a lesson from a country like Indonesia, including a country like Singapore, because Singapore is using Indian diaspora as an asset and to woo the cash-rich diaspora network of the entire world. And that is why the Indian diaspora in Singapore is contributing significantly towards the growth and development of these country like Singapore. And Malaysia should also learn a lesson from Singapore, because as per my analysis for the past several years, Malaysian government, they have given the people of Indian origin as a stepmotherly treatment, as liability. And due to the various policy paralysis, Indians are lagging behind in the development index of Malaysia. No doubt some historical sites are also here, and Malaysians people or organization of like GOPIO are doing very well in preserving these historical sites like Batu Caves or Tugu Negara, because Indians has contributed towards the independence of Malaysia. So they have to tighten their belt and they have to proactive in terms of preserving the cultural resources, the identity and the Indianness, because India is now doing well in terms at the various global platform, and no doubt the Indian government also have to change its attitude towards the people of Indian origin, because most of the time the PIOs, they have mentioned that Indian government is just after the NRIs. But after the AB Vajpayee government, the things has been changed, and now we have included the PIOs in a big way in our foreign policy objective. And here, because with regard to Malaysia, 2 months back, Anwar Ibrahim visited Malaysia. Our foreign minister visited here, and we have announced various things, and we are moving towards are improving our relationship as strategic partners, the way we are doing with Singapore. No doubt, during the Pandit Nehru and Tunku Abdul Rahman, the first Prime Minister of this country, we have had very good relationship. But after slowly and gradually, the relationship became very and we have noted marginalization of people of Indian origin in Malaysian society due to the various reasons. There are various other semi-skilled and skilled workers. We have seen 2007 ka Hendraf ka movement, because the Malaysian government deliberately demolished historical Hindu temples in Malaysia. So some of these contentious issues are here, but the present government, as compared to the for the past several years, Malaysian politics has been ruled by the UMNO, and they have given some discriminatory attitude towards Indian community. As per my understanding, Anwar Ibrahim is doing well with regard to the Indian community as compared to the previous others political leaders of Malaysia. So this is the very high time. And to inculcate Indianness among the youth of Malaysia, both the government of Malaysia, Indian government, and the organization like GOPIO or the others, they have to do well. They should promote the heritage site and cultural preservation, things like yoga. And yesterday our MOS, he has mentioned that very soon you people are going to have the chair for Thiruvalluvar, the chair for Ayurveda. I think the things are in right direction, but we have to work hard to preserve cultural identity and heritage in this country. Because if we compare with Mauritius or the neighboring country like Indonesia as well as Singapore. So with these words, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for highlighting some of the issues that India faces Malaysia faces in terms of cultural preservations and its right to have its own cultural traits and features. Any questions and observation? I'm sure there will be some from Malaysian researchers on this. Yes, please. Yes, Professor Aruna. Yes. Professor Aruna is making intervention, yes.
Aruna.
Can you pass on the mic, please? You have it.
Okay, I'm Aruna. I was from the University of Malaya and also from the National Defense University. I'm very happy that you have worked, a dissertation in comparison of Indians, the diaspora. But all said and done, we have differences. I'm not saying we do not have differences, because it's a multicultural country. The pluralistic nature is always there. But let us not forget the leadership, Indian leadership. If we want to challenge the government or any other person in the government, you must have very strong leaders, and we do not have that. We cannot deny that there is no distribution of funding towards all the races. I know, because I was involved. Money is dispersed to several temples everywhere. But who collects the money? Personal aggrandizement is there. And that is what brings down the community. So you can't blame it on the government, because government gives. But you are the people who are supposed to carry it out. But it is not done. So the leadership is very, very important, I think. Before we throw the stones at one another, let us go back and see who are the leaders. We do not have the right leaders. Even till today, we don't have. So I think that is where the big question is.
Thank you. Yes, sir, please.
Okay, my Excuse me, sir.
My name is Callistus Fernandez. We have a small research unit called Kadram Historical Initiative. Okay, my question is really about us not addressing our past. We didn't talk of only laborers in the 19th century. We actually got history that comes back to the 1st century. And this part of the history is what gave Southeast Asia the greater India feel. So when we talk of diaspora, to a place we already occupied prior. So going back 1,800, 2,000 years, we're already here. Starting from Funan right down to Bujang Valley, which is Kadram at one time, or going down to Java or Sumatra. So this is not much highlighted. So when we talk of cultural preservation, we're not preserving our history as Indians. And right to maybe a couple of centuries back, this was Greater India to a greater extent. We've forgotten the Greater India part. In other domains, we are whatever, but in this part of the world, we're actually Greater India. We were from the 1st century AD, perhaps. So this discourse is an important part of our identity, which does not exist or is tried to be suppressed. So this needs to be highlighted. So our connection to India, or vice versa actually, the fact that the greatest historical sites like Borobudur or Angkor Wat are all here. All the greatest temples are here. It's not in the motherland, so-called. This could be, if you look at the artifacts, we could be the motherland, in a sense. Thanks.
My name is Dr. Vijayaraj. I'm the president, founder of Malaysian Indian Hope Foundation, Malaysia. A paper well presented, but I'm very happy. An Indian from India took the interest of the Indians in Malaysia to write about their whatever the life is in Malaysia. Of course, in your search of information to write, chances are that you would have missed out a lot of other things as well. Some of these things that I would like to comment on is, and I was born way before the independence of this country.
Just sorted questions here.
Yeah, so now I would just like to comment only. Yeah, there's no question here. Okay. Just that the Indians diaspora in Malaysia, and the challenges are, there's a greater disparity, of course, as you mentioned that. And of course, I personally, there's also a lot of what you call deprived of many of my opportunities to do better in life. But there's the government changes, policy changes to the policy, and then you find that the community, the minority, has been left behind. But we cannot be too dependent on the government. As you will know, in your study you'll know that how the Indians on their own would have taken the interests and initiatives to do better in life. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes. Any other observation?
I'm Moharaj Chaman from Mauritius. I would like to do some observation. In Mauritius, if we compare what the doctor mentioned, how the government is helping the various communities. In Mauritius, if you compare it, we have 3 ways how government helps those cultural preservation. You have the temples, the Hindu temples, Tamil, Telugu. These temples, they all receive donation from government, grants from government. Then they have other means also, speaking unions. That is, Tamil speaking union. They also, so suppose one religious group, Tamil, they receive 3 types of donation or grants from the government. The speaking union, the cultural center and the religious body. This is how this helped to preserve our culture, religion, and all the values. This was my, thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for the comments and observation. And yes, I know because in this 10 or 15 minutes, due to the paucity of time, I cannot mention the entire crux of my thesis and my research on Malaysia, because I know, yes, there is a serious leadership fail from the side of Malaysian Indians, and specifically from Malaysian Indian Congress, because for the past several years, they were part and parcel of the Malaysian government. But they failed miserably because they only enjoy the power with the ruling alliance, and they were not very assertive as compared to some of the leaders of the Malaysian Chinese Association, MCA. Sorry to say that, because I am Indian, so I can say very bluntly, MIC failed the aspiration of the Malaysian Indians, and that is why still Malaysian Indians are struggling of their day-to-day lives. And there is no doubt, without the government support, whatever you have achieved, it is very remarkable, very remarkable. On the other, yes, we have to work on our history, and various historians, they have also underlined the greater India with regard to addressing the entire Southeast Asian countries. And you are very right, because one of the largest Hindu temple of this world is not in India, but in Angkor Wat. But the way Cambodia is preserving, Thailand is also preserving the Hindu identity, I think country like Malaysia should learn a lesson. No doubt Wahhabi form of Islam is also increasing over here, and these people are very assertive, and they are aiming to corner the other ethnic group. But yes, we have to organize ourselves, and we have also assert ourselves as a significant minority of Malaysia, and we have to elevate from among ourselves some of the decisive leaders. Then I think we can, or the Malaysian Indians can work well for the future generation of Malaysian Indians. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to add a few things, that some of the points that was made on the historical side, that the greater India was from there, and or from here, originated from where. I think all discussions are most welcome, but such connection is just not confined to previous century or 2 centuries back. India, that is recognized as India, Indian values, Indian culture, Indian identity, civilization, predates several BC earlier. So where was India, where from the Indian value originated, is not even confined to the first AD. So I think that debate is to be taken where the history enables us to trace what was India and when, how many BC earliest, when was Ashoka, when was Buddhism, when was Harappan civilization, where from the Indian civilization and culture has spread, from here to there or from there to here. Just one observation that one has to take into account. The second part, that Mauritius, the several grants that come to several cultural entities, is very important for Malaysia as well. But that was, the motive behind that was different. Was not for cultural preservations of Indian, but cultural divisions of Indians. And I don't want to get into that because that's how it happened in Mauritius. Professor Aruna, for your observation is very right, whether Mr. Same Velu or any other leadership failed. But when you are, as you said, multicultural society, and when you have the leadership, the blame does not go to the community leadership. It's the duty, an unquestioned duty of the government in power to make sure the leadership or no leadership, accountable leadership or no accountable leadership, but they are the government of the people, of everyone. And if some leadership fails, they cannot hide behind that curtain of that leadership. It's the responsibility of the government to make sure that all community are benefiting from the growth and is not marginalized. And the leadership, if it is puppet leadership, that cannot be something that can be then said that community doesn't throw the leadership. Community does participate in forming the government, and it's the government's responsibility to see to it, irrespective of the leadership, because they represent all. Thank you so much. Let's give a big hand to Dr. Amit Singh. And the next speaker, we have Dr. Ramesh Ramasamy, a very distinguished academic career. There is a big CV. I have been just applied. He is Associate Professor and Senior Lecturer, Department of Political Science, University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka. You can add something more if you intend to. He is going to talk about incomplete citizenship rights of the Indian origin Tamil community of Sri Lanka, access to governance, institutions, and social rights.
And good morning, everyone. Let me begin by thanking GOPIO International, GOPIO Malaysia, and GOPIO Chapter Sri Lanka for inviting me to make a presentation in this important convention. And also I must thank the Sri Lankan GOPIO leader, Mr. Bala, for inviting me to be a part of this conference. After listening to Dr. Amit's presentation, what I thought was there are similarities between Indians in Malaysia and Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. So what I am going to do is that I will give a kind of overview about the current status of Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. So my title is Incomplete Citizenship of the Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. They are citizens in legal terms in Sri Lanka, but if you look at their socio-economic, political and cultural status, they are experiencing a kind of demonized form of citizenship in Sri Lanka for the last 200 years in this country. So I would like to give a kind of overview about this community. So plantation community, there are several names used to identify Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. If you look at the official records of the government of Sri Lanka, they use the term Indian origin Tamils. But in other contexts, people use plantation Tamils, people use estate Tamils, and now the term upcountry Tamils or hill country Tamils are becoming quite dominant, quite popular in this community among the younger generation. And if you look at the ethnic ratio in Sri Lanka, Sinhalese accounts to 74%, the majority of the country, and Sri Lankan Tamils, those who are confined to north and eastern part of Sri Lanka and well known across the world due to civil conflict, 33 decades of civil conflict, and they accounts to 11.2%, and Sri Lankan Moors 9.2%, and then Indian Tamils accounts to 4.2%. And they came to Sri Lanka in the 18th century to work on newly introduced coffee plantations. Later, they were transformed to tea and rubber plantations. Yes. So I would also like to give some evidence about their contribution to the national economy. As you all know, the Ceylon tea has been a cornerstone of the national economy for 2 centuries. And which actually laid the foundation for the welfare state in Sri Lanka. right? As someone mentioned in Mauritius, education is free, health is free. The same case in Sri Lanka, right? We have universal welfare programs, universal healthcare and free education in Sri Lanka. So all of these became possible simply because of the contribution made by the Indians in Sri Lanka since the early 19th century. And in 2022, the tea exports reached a record revenue in Sri Lanka, which is rupees 411 billion, which accounts to 9.6% of the total export revenue in Sri Lanka. So that simply indicates the contribution made by Indian Tamils to the national economy over the years. And the South Indians who settled down in Sri Lanka are largely, these are the terms I already explained, and a large segment of this community still lives on the plantations, right? They are still living on the British, constructed old line rooms, which are actually, I would say, more than 150 years old, these line rooms are. And some have, gradually moved to urban areas for employment needs and other different purposes. So the migration is very common in this community. As someone mentioned yesterday, there's a drastic decline in the plantation labor force, right? The current population of Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka is roughly 1.4 million or 1.5 million, we are estimating, but the government says their population is just 8 lakhs. Right, according to our estimation, some of the academics, including Professor Chandra Bose, has estimated their total population is 1.4 or 1.5 million. So if you look at the current workforce in the plantations, tea and rubber plantations, we have only 150,000 people are working on the plantations as registered full-time workers. Others are gradually migrating to the urban areas, and some have stopped working on the plantations. So there is an increasing pattern of non-working population in the plantations now. And in 1931, actually, they have maintaining their own distinctive identity than that of Sri Lankan Tamils, those who are living in the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka. So when in 1931, plantation people constituted 15% of the total population of Sri Lanka, which has now come to 4.2%. So you can understand the drastic decline of their population over the years in this country. Yes, this is just to show the decline of their population. So I don't want to go to details of these statistics because Professor Chandra Bose will also explain about the decrease of their population over the years. So I have highlighted only the 1931 population, just nearly 15% in the total population. Now it has come to just 4.1%. Yes, move on, please. So we have been working on the Indian Tamil community for many years. As a result of our research over the years, we have identified 7 different segments emerged in this community over the last 200 years. Someone can compare these different segments in Malaysia also, how the Malaysian Indians have emerged over the years. One segment is those who are continuously working on the estates as laborers, full-time laborers, working class, which is very, very small in terms of population. And there's another segment, non-state worker population, which accounts to 75% of the total population of Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. They are not ready to work on the plantations anymore. And the third class is lower middle class has emerged in this community who are employed in the public sector at the lower level positions or jobs. Maybe school teachers and so on. And then there's another class emerged in this society which we call upper middle class people. Professionals, engineers, doctors, university academics, right? Business elites and so on, which comes under the classification of upper middle class, which is very, very low, less than 5% in this community. And also there's another very powerful business elites, business class, those who are involved in business in Colombo, Kandy and Badulla. They are very dominant in those cities. And you can see some of them in this conference as well. And also there's another segment in this community, those who actually migrated to north and eastern part of Sri Lanka due to ethnic conflict, due to continuous violence took place in the plantation areas in 1970s and 80s. They have completely permanently settled in the north and east, and they are rapidly drifting away from their Indianness or Indian culture and identity. They are gradually assimilating with Sri Lankan Tamils identity and culture now. And there's another segment, youth. Maybe more than 5 lakhs of youth have migrated from the plantations. They are now settled in the urban areas, and some of them went to Middle East countries for employment opportunities. So these are the different segments that we can observe in the Sri Lanka's Indian Tamil community. And when it comes to the political rights and political status, because many of our presenters, the participants talked about political leadership, the importance of political leadership to win the rights of Indians in different countries, even in Malaysia. Actually, we had very good political leaders in 1980s and 90s, up to 2000, I can say. Now there is a leadership vacuum or crisis among the Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. Therefore, it is extremely difficult to make our demands to the government, even to lobby or advocate with the government to win certain rights of Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. So there is very clearly political leadership vacuum in this community, which is very, very important to bargain with the government, ruling government, to win the rights of Indian Tamils. And there are 3 or 4 major trade unions or political parties representing the Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka, which are currently weak. They are unable to exert their pressure on the ruling government to win certain rights of this community. But still, there are 9 parliamentarians in the current parliament of Sri Lanka. Out of 225, Indian Tamils are 9. They are representing 9 members are from Indian Tamil community, and 1 cabinet minister is there representing the Indian Tamil community. And also Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka are having representations in provincial councils and local government authorities to some extent, and thereby they are using their consolidated funds to undertake certain development programs for the betterment of the Indian Tamils in certain areas. So anyway, trade unions have been playing a dominant role throughout the history of Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. We can see that pattern even now. When it comes to social development, this is very, very important, because where I can relate a Malaysian case. If you look at the human development indicators, national level human development indicators in Sri Lanka, which is quite satisfactory. But if you compare the national level human development indicators with the Tamils of Indian origin, which is completely dissatisfactory. There is very clear discrepancy in terms of education, health, housing, land rights, access to government services, employment opportunities among the Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. They are excluded, they are marginalized in the areas of education, health, housing, land, and so on. When it comes to education, we can satisfy with the primary or school level education, but when it comes to university education, extremely they are backward. Less than 1% of Indian Tamils get university admission in Sri Lanka. And when it comes to postgraduate education, it is even less. And they get some Indian government scholarship, ICCR scholarship or Commonwealth scholarship to go to India, and which is also very much restricted. And the Indian Tamils are not fully covered under these scholarship programs. And then when it comes to health, the plantation health system is still managed by private plantation companies, not by the government. So the political leaders, civil society, academies have long been demanding the successive governments of Sri Lanka to take over or the mainstream the health sector on par with other segments of society, communities of the country. But still the government has not taken any meaningful measures to mainstream the health sector. And similarly, housing is a big demand now in Sri Lanka. Indian government has provided roughly 8,000 houses for Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka, which has not been completed yet. There are lots of government changes time to time. They are starting the housing scheme program and they stop at some point. There are also problems in the Indian housing program. The government of Sri Lanka has given, around 30,000 houses so far since 1990s. So housing is a huge demand in this community. Around 80% of Indian Tamils do not have their own house in Sri Lanka. But they are living for 200 years. They are contributing for the economy for 200 years, but they don't have right to housing. And similarly, land right, which is also very big issue in Sri Lanka now. Persistent struggle is going on to win the land rights on the part of government, but we don't see any meaningful move on the part of government to provide, ensure right to land to the people of Indian origin in Sri Lanka. And access to public service is very much limited due to variety of reasons, because the Sri Lanka's public sector does not represent the real demography of the society. The Sri Lanka's public sector is largely dominated by ethnic majority. So therefore, minorities like Indian Tamils do not have access to public institutions because their representation is extremely poor in the public sector. And we do not have a quota system to ensure the public sector employment for Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. So that's why I have mentioned they are merely legal citizens in Sri Lanka, but they don't enjoy substantial benefits of citizenship in Sri Lanka. So they are a kind of excluded insiders. So where organization like GOPIO can make their intervention to uplift the lives of Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. One is they are still struggling for complete citizenship. Civil, political, social, economic, cultural rights are in danger. So therefore, to make them meaningful citizens in Sri Lanka, the government should ensure that they are complete citizens in Sri Lanka in all terms. And the second point is that reforming the discriminatory laws and policies is another concern. Without reforming the discriminatory laws and policies, Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka will not enjoy the meaningful citizenship, the substantial benefits of citizenship, which requires advocacy and lobbying on different parts, including GOPIO, Government of India, many angles. And then networking with other GOPIO chapters would be another avenue to empower this community. They will learn lessons, they will share the experience, best practices, which will also give them some kind of opening. And then campaign for reparation, because there is a discussion in Sri Lanka that the British government should give some kind of reparation for the Indian Tamils. Right? And there is a role to be played by the Government of India as well. And the strong intervention of the Government of India is in terms of education, health and investment, right, and housing. And finally, networking NGOs and like-minded organizations working for PIO in different countries, so they can come together, they can develop some kind of collective approach to address the problems of Indian Tamils across the region. So those are the suggestions that I would like to make where GOPIO organizations like GOPIO can make some meaningful intervention to uplift the lives of Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. With that, I stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ramasamy. Very interesting presentation. Yes, please, Professor Murthy.
Thank you to the presenters. I'm Ravi from National University, UKM. To Dr. Ramasamy, what is the progress now in terms of transitional justice that was promised by the government in the post-conflict period? Is it happening? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Siva again. I just want to find out the classification for ethnic. You say Sri Lanka Moors, but how do you put Tamil Muslims or Indian Tamil Muslims and Sri Lankan Tamil Muslims? Where do you classify them? Because you mentioned there Sri Lanka Moors, but Moors are not Tamils. If I understand correctly, the term Moors does not refer to Tamils. So what about Tamil Muslims, Indian Tamil Muslims and Sri Lankan Tamil Muslims? I have a problem with the classification.
Thank you. Any other questions, observations?
Accordingly, my question and your question is a bit same, not that. I saw Sri Lankan Tamils, Indian Tamils, upcountry Tamils, plantation Tamils, hill country people, or Tamils of Indian origin. Are they all people of Indian origin? Or are they PIOs?
Have you taken note of all? Any other observation or question? Anybody wants to share something on what you presented? Or any other question? Okay, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Let me start with Professor Ravichandran's question about transitional justice. The concept transitional justice came into existence after the end of civil war, aiming at Sri Lankan Tamils, those who are living in the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka, not for the Indian Tamils. So therefore, Indian Tamils are excluded in the transitional justice process. And when it comes to progress of the transitional justice, which is not satisfactory.
Aren't the Sri Lankan Tamils the same with the Indian Tamils?
No, because they are geographically disconnected. So they are living in the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka. Indian Tamils are living in the central part of Sri Lanka. So there is a kind of geographical disconnection between these two communities. So this transitional justice has not included Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. So that is to ensure reparation and justice to the war victims of the Sri Lankan Tamil community. And then the term Moor, actually in Sri Lanka we have included Indian Muslims, Sri Lankan Muslims under the category of Sri Lankan Moor. So that's the term we use in Sri Lanka, right? So Sri Lankan Muslims, we call Sri Lankan Muslims. So they actually Indian Muslims, all sort of Muslims come under the same category, Sri Lankan Muslims. And these different terms, Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka are known as plantation Tamils, Indian Tamils, upcountry Tamils, hill country Tamils, and Indian origin Tamils. So there are, 5 terminologies used to refer to the Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. Right, time to time, different organizations, civil society, researchers come up with different terminologies to refer to the Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. So, but when it comes to official record of the government of Sri Lanka, they are known as Indian origin Tamils. So that is still existing in all the official records in Sri Lanka. So therefore, we do use the term Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka in our research, writings and so on. Thank you.
I think he had some further, he's not happy with your answer.
Shall I hear?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. I am Chandra Bose from Sri Lanka. This with regard to the question raised by Mr. Siva. Of course, unfortunately, Sri Lankan Muslims also speak Tamils. They also Tamil community. But unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, they have the Muslim community identified as a separate ethnic group in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
Very, very unfortunate. This is recent phenomenon. After 1971 census onwards, they have separate identity. The religion become a identity, separate identity in Sri Lanka. So therefore, we have Tamil speaking Sri Lankan concentrate in the north and east, and the Tamil speaking community concentrate in the central part, and the Tamil speaking Muslim community spread all over the country in Sri Lanka. So this is very unfortunate, distinct happen in the country.
Is it a reality, fortunate or unfortunate? Thank you. Thank you so much for all your very good questions, and Dr. Ramesh Ramasamy for answering all of them. And now we move to the next. Now we move to the next speaker, Professor Dasarath Sethi. He is the president of GOPIO South Africa and a professional academic who was a pro-vice chancellor of Durban University in the past. And he has several affiliations with different university. Even currently, he is visiting professor at Mahatma Gandhi University in India, visiting professor at some university in Germany, and he has written several books and articles on issues related to Indian diaspora. Professor Sethi is going to talk about today about social and structural corrections of the July 2021 violence in South Africa. No, social structural correlates, sorry, correlates of the July 2021 violence in South Africa.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. What I'm going to talk about is the recent violence that made international headlines in South Africa during 7 days in July of 2021. And the reason I want to talk about this is because in many newspapers, in the mainstream media, and political leaders themselves, they express the violence in racial terms. And I want to contextualize the violence itself and essentially argue that it wasn't a racial episode, but it was a response to the conditions in the country that are highly problematic at the moment. So in doing this, I've got a number of slides, but I'm not going to go through everything because I've got only 15 minutes, so I'll go through it quite quickly. I want to talk a little bit about the violence itself, what actually happened, something about the historical background to violence in South Africa, then situate it in macroeconomic policy and the implications of neoliberal economic policies that have been implemented there, our attempts at social redress, which I think we heard about transitional justice, and in Malaysia, numerous attempts at social redress as well. Some of the societal challenges we face, the nature of violence, societal responses in uninvited spaces, the aftermath of the violence, and then end with a few concluding remarks. Now, the abstract of the paper summarizes exactly what happens in this presentation, and so I'm going to read it to you and then explain it before going on, because I won't be explaining a lot in detail. So the paper contends that neoliberalism is inherently authoritarian, in that the structures, relations, and processes that ensue perpetuate and deepen conflictual, hierarchical, and oppressive conditions in society. In the South African context, colonial and apartheid inequalities have been exacerbated by the adoption of policies and programs post-1994 that failed to produce the political rhetoric of transformation into an equitable and socially just society. The result of such negative policy outcomes, such as heightened inequality, mass unemployment, increased poverty, conspicuous consumption, and the continuation of the politics of humiliation, has been public protest on an unprecedented scale. Public participation therefore takes place in what I've called uninvited spaces on a daily basis, whilst invited spaces do not yield meaningful gains, especially for the poor. Protests culminated in unprecedented unrest in July 2021, leading to violent protests in 2 provinces, triggered by political machinations within the ruling party, resulting in over 350 deaths, 50 billion rand in damage to property, mainly business premises, and thousands of job losses. More importantly, intergroup conflict between Indians and Africans reared its ugly head, signaling a failure of the nation-building project. The paper discusses how macroeconomic policies may foster authoritarianism in society and explains the underlying correlates of the July violence as a failure of social inclusion and democratic participation initiatives that produces social enemy. Okay, so what happened in July 2021? As you know, South African society is a divided society. There's heightened inequality in that society. There's high levels of unemployment, especially since 1994, as I've just explained. Successive ANC governments have been intent on, theoretically and through the political programs and policies at least, on equalizing the conditions for the historically disadvantaged in our country. And the Indian community is regarded as part of that historically disadvantaged majority in the country. So the three communities, Indians, Coloureds who are mixed race, and Africans who are the indigenous black people, who form what we call historically disadvantaged communities. And so similar to Malaysia, a number of affirmative action programs with quotas and so on were put into place to try and address and equalize the conditions in society for people to perform. But in saying those things, and rather than adopting policies that would involve the government more, the South African government decided that neoliberal economics, which dominates the world stage and has done it for the past 30 or 40 years, should be introduced in the South African context, that South Africa should be part of a global economy, become a global player, and that all of the conditions that make for integration into an international economy should be put in place. And those conditions were extremely problematic, worsened the issues to the point where, because of the way in which the policies were implemented, it led to serious corruption within and outside government. Matters came to a head under the presidency of President Jacob Zuma, and President Ramaphosa put in place a state capture commission of inquiry to investigate how can it be that a president can be captured by business people in that way, leading to corruption throughout the society and in almost every ministry in the country. And you may have read that the Gupta brothers from India were responsible because of the kind of relationship they had with President Jacob Zuma. But it wasn't only the Guptas that enjoyed this cozy relationship with the president and benefited to the tune of hundreds of billions of rands. So we are talking massive amounts of money that was supposed to have been spent on the poor, that was being siphoned out of the country to Dubai, using banks like the Bank of Baroda that set up in South Africa, illegal transactions, money leaving the country, cash leaving the country, US dollars, and so on. But as I say, the Guptas were in the forefront. They became the best known of the business leaders who operated in this way with the South African government. And so trillions of rands left the country, and money that was supposed to have been spent on the development of the country, on the poor, on building a welfare state, which we needed, some kind of Marshall Plan after the fall of apartheid and from 1994 to bring people up to the level where they can perform, was not put into place. So during the state capture inquiry headed by Judge Zondo, who was the head of the Constitutional Court, President Jacob Zuma was called up to actually account for himself. And when he saw the kind of grilling he was getting, and that he was implicating others in this, and that the consequences were going to be severe, he decided not to appear before the commission anymore. He was then charged with contempt of not responding to the Constitutional Court judge, and the judge then sentenced him to 2 years in prison, so 2-year incarceration. So what then happened was that President Jacob Zuma is a Zulu nationalist leader, and the Zulus make up the largest ethnic group in South Africa, and in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, where we live and where the largest number of Indians live, Zulus are dominant. That led to initial protests against the incarceration, and then into a full-blown, almost insurrection against the government of the country in July 2021. So it started with acts of sabotage. Durban is the largest port in the continent of Africa, and every day thousands and thousands of containers arrive at that port, and thousands of trucks transport them to other parts of the country and even to other parts of Africa. The sabotage started with the burning and looting of trucks on our national freeways running from Durban to other parts of the country. And with the burning of trucks, it led to traffic, as you can imagine, backlogs, containers not being offloaded off the ships that were arriving in the harbor, and chaos generally in that sphere. It was then, it led to shortages of food and fuel, and this was the necessary impetus for a breakdown of law and order. So it was planned, and it coincided with the incarceration of Jacob Zuma. That was the social detonator, if you like, that broke the camel's back and started this looting. And then the looting began in small, on a small scale, and grew to a massive scale when the state did not intervene and did not put an end to it through use of military force or police force or any kind of force to ensure that law and order was maintained. The government at the time, it is presumed, firstly didn't have sufficient intelligence about what was being planned, that such a serious attack on our democracy was being perpetrated from within the system. And the failure of the intelligence network led to inertia on the part of the police and the army. So the police stood by as the looters looted. And it was the most amazing scenes for 7 days. Huge shopping centers were assaulted by thousands of people, and stuff was just taken out. They carried the stuff and ran away. And in general, 70 billion rand was lost, 40,000 businesses were affected, 150,000 jobs were lost, stock worth 1.5 billion was lost in Durban alone, 200 malls were targeted, some burnt, were vandalized, 100 malls were burnt or significantly damaged by a fire, 3,000 shops were looted during the protests, 200 banks and post offices were vandalized, 150,000 informal traders were targeted, automatic bank teller machines were blown up, destroyed, and the money stolen, factories, warehouses, schools, delivery trucks, all of that was affected as well. So this just shows you some of the things and some pictures of what happened and the extent of it. After 7 days, the state put in the army, and the army brought this matter to a close. So I know there's not enough time to do a proper analysis, but I'll show you the pictures of looters. These are just some of the pictures. So the point that I want to make is that when you introduce macroeconomic policies that are aimed at export-led economic growth, that do not support local industry, that ask for a smaller role for the state and a bigger role for the private sector in a country that comes out of a situation like apartheid, you don't address the historical disadvantages and inequalities of the past. In fact, you worsen them. And that is what has happened in the South African context. And this response by thousands and thousands of ordinary people, poor people, in raiding the malls, in stealing food and so on, was what I call a response, and an uninvited response in terms of political participation. This led to the failure of the ANC in the last election, and from 67% under Nelson Mandela, the ANC now has 40% of the seats in the National Parliament. So the point is that for the Indian community in Durban, where the looting was extremely serious, many Indians lost businesses, lost property and so on, and about 5 were actually killed in the violence. But at the same time, it is reported that 35 black people were killed by Indians in the violence. And these were looters who were going through Indian townships. And the manner in which it was reported suggested that this was a racialized violence. But because of the segregated nature of our society and the fact that we still live in historical group areas, Indian communities and white communities barricaded their areas. And at the entrances and the main roads, Indian men who were armed stood there guarding against looters that they were afraid may come into the communities and loot private homes as well. But largely the looting was restricted only to businesses, malls, factories, and those kinds of things, and shopping centers. But in the Phoenix area, where there's a large concentration of about 300,000 Indians in one huge township, you had these altercations and violence between Indians and Africans that led to 30 Africans being killed. And that then led to talk of what they call the Phoenix Massacre. So I'm saying that as a diaspora community, whilst it is important to perpetuate our culture and our heritage and so on, it is even more important to look at how do we become part and parcel of the society we live in, build in a socially cohesive way relationships with the powers that be and the communities that are there, so that we can have a truly non-racial democratic country that we've striven for since 1994 and even before that. And Indian South Africans have played a particularly important role in the struggle for freedom in South Africa. And you may know that one of our great leaders, Praveen Gordhan, passed away yesterday. He was the former Minister of Finance as well in the government of President Jacob Zuma. So, and this is not peculiar. The interracial conflict is not peculiar to South Africa. I think there are a number of countries where this happens, albeit in slightly different forms. But I think it has to be on the agenda as well of GOPIO for discussion. And in terms of a way forward, how can we support each other with the government of India playing a far more constructive role, which it has always played, by the way, when it came to anti-apartheid movements and dispensations. Thank you, Professor Dubé. Okay, thank you. I'm going to answer the question on privilege first, because it leads into fears. So in the South African context, because of apartheid, as you know, the society was stratified and segregated, and it was a simple divide and rule strategy, as the British did everywhere in the world. And so the Indians were regarded as being more privileged than the Africans and coloreds, were closer to the whites in a number of ways. And in practical terms, it meant that the government was spending a little more money on Indian education than it did on African and colored education, a little more money on child welfare than it did for other communities, and kept them apart. But also, there's as we know, the history of Indian communities anywhere. Hard work, dedication, family values, all of that combined with the little help that they got from the white government allowed them to prosper way beyond they would have done in other circumstances. So that is the extent of the privilege. But in real terms, we were dehumanized in the same way that others who were regarded as non-whites were and treated in that inhuman way. So whilst there may have been a little privilege, I think that as black South Africans, and we identify ourselves as black South Africans, we don't believe we were privileged, and we believe that even before apartheid, that our future lies with ensuring unity with the disenfranchised people of the country. So as a result of the divided nature of society, and as a result of the segregated communities and the geographical areas in which we lived, there were always fears that African people may attack Indians. And in our history, there's been two major riots which were instigated by white business in the first instance, and in the second by the apartheid government, where Africans were used to attack Indian communities. And in the first riot in 1949, it left an imprint on the psyche of the older generation of Indians, who brought up their children to be fearful of Africans and fearful about living in South Africa because you can't trust them. And this process of othering continued to the point where even today we need a decolonization of the mind to ensure that we see each other as human beings, that we reflect on our history, on our common conditions vis-à-vis the elites in our society, and work to change that. So a direct answer to your question is there's still a great deal of fear amongst minority groups about African majority.
Thank you, Professor Sethi. I had a few questions and observations, but we have 2 more presentations to go in 15 minutes, so I'll hold it and discuss with you later on. So our next, thank you so much, please give me a big hand. Now we have Professor Bijay Pratihari. He is Associate Professor in Academy of International Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia University, which is Central University. And he works on diaspora and teaches courses on diaspora. Over to you.
Thanks GOPIO and ODI for giving me opportunity to participate in a significant convention on the PIOs. So my topic is a little bit different from the focus of the session. I am here presenting about the priorities, response and responsibility and policies of the home country, that is India, from where PIOs went to different parts of the world. So my exact topic is India and its efforts to engage PIOs, a new approach. That means, once you said new approach means, there must be an old approach. So I'll come into, to discuss all these things. Diaspora forms, since the 7 minutes the chair is given to me because of the reduced timing and the... So I will be leaving many of the details. So diaspora forms an important and integral part of the Indian foreign policy. That is the new approach, you can say. And the policies with regard to diaspora from the Indian point of view underwent drastic changes. And the increasing importance is being attached to diaspora during the time period of successive governments. So, and however, India will be greatly or immensely benefited, and because once the potential of the connectedness or the interaction of the diaspora is fully realized, it implies the strong, active and direct engagements with the various diasporas of the world. And if we engage in that way, that will correspondingly benefit also India in terms of economic and strategic, the areas and economic interest of the countries. I am not going to the definition of diaspora, and that is already taken care of. And so therefore the PIOs could lead to a closer relationship with their respective countries, and in that sense, formation of the multidimensional or the transnational diasporas, if you cultivate the Caribbean and Latin American diaspora, that is and the strong presence of PIOs in Tobago, Guyana and Suriname, that indirectly lead us to the formation of the diaspora, engagement diaspora with different countries of the world. And coming to different aspects, and if we similarly cultivate the diaspora of the Mauritius, and that will lead to open up with our interaction with the other African countries. That will get to it. Like Suriname diaspora, we can go to contact the Indo-Surinamese in Netherlands. In that sense, it's twicely benefited to India to interact with the larger community and reach out to the larger communities. And in that sense, the region, and I am coming to the regional dimensions, all these regions are strategically important, especially the Indian Ocean region and Asia Pacific, and therefore larger presence of the Chinese also. And India should therefore take opportunity to further strategic interest in Asia Pacific and Indian Oceans. So therefore in that sense, these countries the Fiji, Suriname, and the other countries are very significant and for India's presence. For example, there is a larger diasporic presence in Indo-Fijians in New Zealand. So if you have the larger connectedness or the interactions with the Fiji, therefore we can reach them with the betterment of the New Zealand. And same applies to the Indo-Surinamese, and therefore we can have a large interaction with the Netherlands and other areas. So these are the basic background of how diaspora can, different countries can help the India to achieve its strategic and economic goals. And so next part of the paper is changes in the diaspora policy. With regard to India, the diasporic policy changes into, we have a pre-Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the policy, largely the Congress, the government in India, and during the Vajpayee and the post-Vajpayee policy. Initially, the diasporic interactions, the government of India's policy was complete disassociation till that period. And the successive changes happened during the prime ministership of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Complete disassociation means that time the government of India regarded the diaspora as since they are citizens of those countries, therefore the policy largely was that because of the non-interference in the affairs of the sovereign country, therefore India should not do much to help the diasporic community. And therefore there are many crises were there, where the government of India took did not take any strong stand. Like the Burmese crisis in 1964, when General Nguyen nationalized many of the properties of the India, one of the largest community in Burma at that time. Therefore, but government of India didn't do anything. Second was Ugandan Asian crisis during the Idi Amin period in Uganda. And therefore, again same thing happened, the largest nationalization, and therefore almost all PIOs left the country. And the another last crisis was the Fijian crisis, when Mahendra Chaudhary was deposed in a military coup by the Rabuka, but the government of India didn't do much. So these are some of the examples where because of the earlier policy of complete disassociation, the government of India didn't do or take much a strong action. But Vajpayee government is a sea change. And after that, many of the policies and positive policies, in my point of view, now diaspora has looked at a strategic asset, part of the foreign policy. And therefore, the government of India started to cultivate the diaspora more actively, more proactively rather. And many policies have been introduced. I am not going into detail because of the shortage of the time. Policy is there already in the website. But the main policy, recent policies are based on the two pillars, or we can say the two foundations. For one, it has to cater to the PIOs, and so now the new policy, part of the new policy, NRIs or non-resident Indians are part of the diasporic policy for the betterment or development of them. So therefore, the one part of the policy is that they cater to the needs of the NRIs and OCIs, now the providing them services. Secondly, second part of this policy, new policy was that they create policies to encourage the diaspora to contribute Indians' growth. First part is to policies to cater their need and betterment. Second policy is how India can be benefited from this engagement in terms of the strategic and the economic interest. And in this context, the No India program and other various policies, Pravasi Bharatiya Kendra and other policies are there. And India also, I mean the Indian diaspora, the PIO is also contributing largely. One of the brightest example was the remittances. Remittances around the 100 billion USD and the 2023 report. And on the way, if the cultivation of the diaspora is, they can become a partner of the development. But surprisingly, I want to mention is that the percentage of investment in India's GDP is very less from the diasporic community, hardly 7 to 10%. Overall, the FDIs. But nonetheless, I mean, the policies hope in the future also more development, for investment came from the diasporic groups. But there are a few examples, brightest examples of how diaspora is helping the government of India. One of the brightest is that Indo-US nuclear deal, where the diasporic population in USA greatly helped in the government of India in signing the Indo-US nuclear deal. Another example was that when during there's a phase in the government of India during the Chandrasekhar's government where we faced the balance of payment crisis. We don't have foreign reserves once because that time the policy was a controlled regime during Mrs. Gandhi till the Manmohan Singh came, finance minister, and Narasimha Rao, they opened up the economy. But till then, our economy was a largely closed or controlled economy, and that time we faced the balance of payment crisis. We don't have larger foreign reserve to cater to the import needs. Therefore, the government of India floated the NRI bond, and it was oversubscribed by several times. That way, the Indian diaspora also helping the Indian governments or India to tide over the crisis at a crucial juncture. So therefore, there are numerous examples. Indian diaspora also can lobby and do to cement the ties with different government the host countries where they are located. So therefore, there is a two-pronged strategy and two-pronged you can say the interactions where both the parties can be beneficial. And since India is now considered as an emerging power, that means in other way the diasporic population can help now. A rising power, key stakeholder, and the security dynamics, especially South and Southeast Asia. These are the basic focus areas where diaspora can help us to achieve the goals. But there are many challenges also. At the conclusion, find it? Okay. And there are many negative, positive impacts of the diasporic policy that because of shortage of time, I am not going into detail, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Patihari, to highlight some of the policy changes which India had on Indian diaspora from a policy of dissociation to policy of proactive associations. There had been major landmarks and changes, but it's also not completely interrupted policy. Nehru, when he became Prime Minister, the first ambassador that he appointed was for Mauritius. 1947, 48, when Mauritius was still a colonial country. It became independent in 1968. But the first ambassador he appointed was for. And so it was very much on the radars of Government of India, the Indian, when East Africa was still under colonial rule. Abba Saheb Pant was appointed as ambassador for the East Africa, a region which has substantial Indian diaspora, very influential Indian diaspora even during colonial period. And he was briefed and mandated to support liberation of African countries. And Indians used to go to him as if the Indian PM was there. So they used to articulate and move to his house so much that the Star newspaper of South Africa, Professor Sethi, wrote that Nehru is a Hindu communist. So that's the word they coined, that he wants to replace African colonialism by Indian colonialism by bringing in Indians into power in East Africa. So though the fact remains that there was a major shift from Nehru to Vajpayee time when related to Indian diaspora, but there was never a weaker feeling even during Nehru time. The time was different. The states were nascent, very, very new state who had the problem what Professor Sethi mentioned of forming multicultural society where Indian cultures, Indian identity has to be blended with the larger national identity, societal identity. And so at that time assertion by Indian state, which itself was very weak, just became independent, would have been very counterproductive. You mentioned about Uganda, a major crisis as far as Indian, in fact, most difficult crisis which any Indian community has faced, where in 90 days' time, the most affluent and settled population for over 150 years was asked to go or to get killed. When Indian government approached, you know what Indian government was told? Please don't accept us, even if they are, because the Britain was saying they should go back to India, they should not come back to Britain. So Indian embassy, if you read the books by the Indian ambassador at that point of time, was just flooded with requests, please don't accept any Indian in India. It was, we don't want to go to India. So we say, no, we will not take, and let the Britain who brought them here decide and get us there. So when finally India refused to take them, and Britain agreed to take them in Canada and Britain, India said, now that you have accepted the responsibility, we are ready to take as many Indians who wants to come to India. Because that's what the diaspora wanted. No, they were not British citizens, British passport holder, but that was over in 1967 in Kenya. So they were, then they had a choice to go to Britain and India. Not a single one of them came to India. All of them went to Britain and Canada. And the world saw that India did not help Ugandan when they were in the worst crisis. The India did the best what they wanted. So I think there is so much behind the scene than what we see, that what India did and what India did not do. Mahendra Chaudhary, the way the regional community, Australia and New Zealand, was mobilized, and India said, we move if you don't intervene. You know, the Supreme Court of Fiji and that region is handled collectively, and how Australia and New Zealand made sure that the regime is changed by the court judgment. And the India played a very significant role at that point of time. So there are so many things that happens. It appears India didn't drop atom bomb at them when something happened, which was not possible and would have been counterproductive. I didn't want to interfere about South Africa thing simply because there, the singers during Mandela time who were singing that every Indian whom we see on the road you should kill, it's your fundamental duty, because they had been exploiting us and looting us and benefiting at our cost. And Mandela had to come out of his own retirement time because the Mbeki was there, and he said, no, this is not done, this we don't agree. When this transition took place, the Durban newspaper published, when Indian was appointed as police commissioner, that all Indians should go back, ships should be made ready, they must go. So there were issues that were there, and the kind of things that happens now also makes Indians, as you asked, unsafe, and as Professor Sethi said, there is a question of safety still for them. And India can do only from the background. It cannot just go and intervene in a country. It makes things much more complicated than solve it. As you have seen in Sri Lanka, it became much more complicated than it really solved that issues. Thank you, Dr. Vijay Pratihari. I wanted to make a few observations because your presentation was giving entirely different perspective to the whole thing. Any questions and observation now?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and my colleagues and my friends. and my GOPIO members who led by thank for Mr. Bala to bring me. My presentation is briefly on Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka, the changing patterns of ethnic identity and culture. This is the content. I'm not going to discuss the content. And the next slide, yes. This is the pattern of population. I see. Population. In the Indian Tamil, we have census record from 1847. But Indian Tamils were identified in the census as a separate ethnic group in Sri Lanka from 1911 onwards. 1911 onwards, the Tamils living in Sri Lanka were divided into two. That is, the people who are concentrated in the northern east, consider them as a traditional Sri Lanka Tamils living in Sri Lanka as a separate ethnic groups. And those who have migrated to be worked in the plantation is considered as a separate Tamils, and it is nomenclature of the Tamil is Indian Tamils. So Tamils was very dominant. It's the second largest population in 1911 up to 1953 onwards, and reduced. You can see after 1971 it is reduced. Why it is reduced? That is the major content of major question of my study. Next. Yeah. Now you can see from 1981 to 2012, around 30 years period, the ethnic composition of various community was increased. Sinhalese 25% increased, Sri Lankan Tamils 18% increase, whereas Moors, I am saying, the Moors, Muslims and Islamics, that word are interchangeably used in Sri Lanka. So these Muslims were 50% increase. The total population also increased by 36%, whereas in the Indian Tamils reduced and only increased by 2%. Why? That's the major question of my presentation. The next. Yeah, this is the distribution of Tamils in Sri Lanka. The first slide, the blue color, is showing how the Sri Lankan Tamils are concentrated in Sri Lanka. And that's mostly northern and east part of the country, whereas they are also spread all over the country, but the percentage of the respective districts is very small, less than 2%. And the second, the pink color, is showing the Indian Tamils concentration is mainly in the central part, and this is in the latest statistics, and move to the other part of the country. And also, now, as Dr. Ramesh presented his earlier, now since it is the population decline, why it is a decline? We can see next slide. Yeah, why it is decline? Because these these are the reasons the decline of the population. One is the impact of implementation of Citizenship Acts in 1948, and many of them are become non-citizens, and they didn't get the voting rights till 2003. 2003, when they completed the voting rights to be given to everybody, it was, took nearly 60 years to give them the voting rights. That is also one reason. They are not aware of whether they are to be here in Sri Lanka, or whether they are going to be in India or nowhere. That situation. So they make them very confused situation, whether they are Sri Lankan Tamils or Indian Tamils or upcountry Tamils, what type of ethnicity they possess, they are very confused about it. And the second reason is repatriation program. In 1974, the India and Sri Lankan government gone for the repatriation program under the Indo-Sri Lanka Pact. So these two were divided into among the Indian Tamils. Around 480,000 people got Indian citizenship, migrated. And after that also they have a confusion. Some of them got Indian citizenship and migrated to India, and some of them received registration registration by citizenship, and they want to say what type of Tamil we are, whether we want to say Sri Lankan Tamils or otherwise Indian Tamils. And many of them are said the Indian Tamils, around 500 of them are reported in the census as Indian Tamils. Now we have a 3 million Tamil population in Sri Lanka. Out of them, 2.2 millions are Sri Lankan Tamils, whereas in the census, as far as the census report is concerned, only 800,000 are Indian Tamils. But it is wrong explanation in the census, because it should be ideally, as far as our democratic calculation we have independently conducted, our population should be 1.3 million, not 800,000. The difference population claim them as a Sri Lankan Tamils. Now among 2.2 Sri Lankan Tamils, nearly 500,000 of them are Indian Tamils. And also, the other pattern also taken place after these riots and many atrocity taken among the Indian Tamils. They also new agriculture system also developed and attracted to the plantation workers, and many of them are migrated to northeast and they are concentrated there. So they also that is also reason for their changing their identity. Next one. Next one. Now you can see how they have distributed in Sri Lanka. In the northern, it is not a plantation area and concentrated in the northern, not the extreme northern district. Whereas in between northern and other area, you get an agriculture land, pasture land, and you get all many of the Indian Tamil plantation workers were migrated to Mullaitivu, Mannar, and agriculture district and concentrated. You can see the considerable number of the representative of Indian Tamils are living there. And the second is the people, and they also identified themselves as now Sri Lankan Tamils. Then the dialect also changes. They speak Sri Lankan Tamil dialect. And over the period of time, I believe they will assimilate it into that ethnic group. So we can bring them back. And whereas, the Indian Tamils living in the extreme southern part of the country is basically Sinhala dominant community. They very speedily assimilated into Singhalization, Singhala community. Even history say that, the southern part of the Sinhalese are the people who have traveled in Sri Lanka in 13th and 14th century and assimilated into the Sinhalese and identified as a different caste group in Sri Lanka. Karavas, Salagamas, all upper caste community formed the new society in the southern part of the country. They also became a very big businessman and supported the government and become a land owners in the southern part. Likewise, even the Indian Tamil plantation workers also now very speedily assimilated, and by looking at them, you can make a difference between Sinhalese, whether they belongs to Sinhalese or Tamils. They mostly speak, Sinhala language and following the Sinhala culture and assimilated. And of course, they are, as Professor Ajay say, we are losing. They are loose in PIO community in Sri Lanka. And other two communities, those who are living in Colombo and the central part of the area, that is, Nuerale district, concentrate in the plantation, and they continue the Indian culture and the Indian dialect, and throughout the year they continue the all Hindu or otherwise Hindu Indian cultural festivals and etc. And the Colombo business community also, they continue this situation. So we can retain these two communities, those who are in Colombo, urban and suburban community, and the people are concentrated in the central part of the community. That is totally around 800,000 only we retain out of 1.3 population, 1.3 million. 800,000 of them are, I sure that I can believe that we can retain them as a PIO community in Sri Lanka. Next, I think suggestion. Those who choose to live in the northern area, as I told, we are not in a position to return back to them because, they will continue and assimilate it in the process. And there are, students. Now, in order to retain the Indian Tamil identity, we will have to support for the poor community living in the plantation because, they have the separate rules in the country. Unfortunately, we have the state sectors are ruling under the estate labor Indian ordinance. Still, we have the ordinance applicable. Estate labor within bracket Indian ordinance is applicable to the plantation workers. They are not really, as Ramesh mentioned, they are not to come to the national level of social welfare program, national level of salary, wages, national level of health program not reached them. Everything under the look after by the estate labor Indian ordinance. Under that, finishing. Under that, they are struggling to get higher studies. So we will have to support for the tertiary education and retain the cultural activities. And also we will have to establish there are, people, newly emerged people migrated to Colombo and urban cities. They become a very good entrepreneur. The PIO also want to have a good relationship with them and bring them into a big business community in Sri Lanka. And there are, people with all the difficulties because, the education, national education reached to the plantation community. So now we have teachers, physicians, lawyers, journalists, university lecturers, and so forth. And those communities also to be part of the PIO, and our PIO will be very strong, and we can, retain the Indian Tamil culture in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think there may be a misconception that Indians are extremely fearful and under threat in South Africa. That's not the case. I think there are times when fears are heightened, when there's these kinds of protest actions. And like all South Africans, Indians fear crime and violence because it's a very violent society in which the crime rates are extremely high. But the people who suffer the most from that are indigenous African people. So Indians are also victims of crime and violence, and it's reported sensationally. And the point I'm making is that, like all South Africans, Indians face, the similar conditions, but there is fear.
Interactions with the diaspora in India is, the point I want to highlight at the end is that diaspora is not a monolithic. It represents the same society, divisions from the Indian societies. Therefore, aspirations, interactions will be different, vary from diaspora. Diaspora all may not be engaged in the same way with India as a mother country or helping other country. There are divisions also there, choices are there. Therefore, we have seen the many movements also by separating our secessionist movement. Recently, one of the brightest examples in Canada is the Khalistani movement, and recently in UK and USA, we have the protest against our support of that movement. So therefore, we cannot say diaspora will always have the unipolar approach towards the interactions with the India. Thank you.
Yes. One more, this clarification with regard to the conversion of Muslims. Of course, there are incidents taken place, even one full estate community, 300 people living in the one estate. And up to 1980s, there was no mosque. Now there is a mosque. That means, there are, people converted into Muslims among the Indian Tamils. But as far as the total population conversion is concerned, it is insignificant. Whereas, the other religious also influence among the Indian Tamils, and the all evangelical church, large scale evangelical church established, but they are only converting the religion, but not the conversion of the ethnic group.
Yeah, just a quick note. In many countries, Indian diaspora community remain weak and vulnerable. So that's what we understand from Malaysia and Indian case. So this community requires institutional support to empower socio-economic status. So where we have to focus more on in the future, how to build institutional support on the part of government, on the part of GOPIO, on the part of other donor agencies and so on to empower this community. And secondly, we have been demanding in Sri Lanka for an affirmative action to uplift the socio-economic status of Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka in the areas of education, health, land, housing and so on. So if the government comes up with an affirmative policy which will give a kind of opening to improve their socio-economic status. So these are some kind of interventions that we can possibly think in the future. Thank you.
Not on Malaysia, but the sir has asked some comments related to Modi's statement after Sheikh Hasina's exit. There is no doubt Narendra Modi has issued a strong statement against the atrocities on Hindus in Bangladesh. But after that particular statement, most of the Hindus, they were also on the street against these atrocities. The incidences are going down, but again, they have asserted themselves. And because of their assertion, some of these incidents were going down against the Hindu attacks on Hindu community.
Well, on my part, I would say that one should be lucky to be born in Mauritius, but he will be more luckier if he is born from PIO, that is, person from Indian origin. Thank you.
Thank you. On my part, I just left to thank very brilliant presentation by distinguished panelists to bring you different facets of Indian diaspora, its identity issues, its cultural preservation practices and challenges, also India and diaspora to some extent. So it had been a very enriching presentation session for me at least to listen to all of them and to know more of it. And you should thank me because I have finished it right in the time.
Oh,
thank you.